In the decades between 1830 and 1860, tremendous change occurred in American life. Women were central to those changes. One of the most fundamental changes was the emergence of the middle classes, the emergence of the middling sector of the society as what historians call the hegemonic power in the society, the place from which energy was coming in many directions, and the place that was giving definition to what it was to be an American. Now, in that process of change, the nature of family life was undergoing redefinition. The nature of family life was undergoing redefinition. And the change was taking place from what you might call a pre-modern family that characterized 18th century family life, in which fertility was high, patriarchy controlled the family's process, and new families of origin were created very much under the control of the father and mother of their children. The new family, the modern family that we know in our late 20th century and early 21st century emerged around 1800, had its most creative decades between 1830 and 1850 to take shape. Those were lowering fertility, greater equality between men and women in the family, and the formation of new families under the auspices of couples coming together and creating those families rather than parents controlling the creation of those families. So this was a profound change. And in that process, women were emerged to be very much more important players than they had been in the organization of family life in pre-modern times. So that modern family was what we call a Victorian family. That is to say, it had all of the characteristics of valuing emotion and feeling, valuing what it called naturalness, and comparing that to an artificial construction which it characterized with the 18th century, and above all, valuing the relationship between mothers and children. So a good mother, and of course, once again, this is a part of a middle class style, a good mother was the mother who recognized the individuality of each child and cultivated that individuality. So this was part of a larger context in which children were valued for themselves as individuals, that is, for the quality of their selfhood rather than for the numbers of them. And fertility in this context fell dramatically. Demographic historians call this the demographic revolution. From 1800 to 1940, this is a very long time, and the term is also used secular decline, meaning long-term decline and irreversible change, from a birth rate of completed families around 1800 of a little more than 7 children, that is, to families in which women survived beyond the age of 50, to families with with lower than replacement of what it took to replace the population by 1940, from one of the highest birth rates in the world to one of the lowest in the world. So this change, amazingly enough, occurred in its most rapid decades between 1840 and 1860. Those were the most rapid decades of decline. The features of women's power in this period, in which they are taking much more unprecedented control of their own bodies, is the kind of control they exercised in the household. And commentators of the time talk a great deal about the notion of separate spheres. This, of course, was a total construction that they were giving to their experience, which very imperfectly articulated that experience, because public and private are always very porous. But their notion of a sphere of women that was controlled by women, that was domestic, was a new thing and a modern thing in 19th century family life. And it articulated the exit of men from the household in this market economy, where their work was leaving the household, and secondly, the glorification of the relationship between the mother and the child as an important social agenda, to make it a more complete story culturally, that this sphere of women included not only the relationship to the child, but a sort of central place in the home, and a place to which, as men returned from that cruel and heartless market economy, they too received nurture and were restored, as opposed to an earlier family economy in the household that was dominated by men, in which women were productive, and women remained productive in the 19th century household too. They did a lot of productive work. If they didn't suddenly inherit leisure, but their work was more and more defined in terms of generating a functioning household that nurtured this middle-class family, as opposed to an 18th century notion of an economic unit that was dominated by men. It became an effective unit that was dominated by women.